So let's take a look at those stories and others in more detail in terms of what's being discussed in the global media. So the front page of Arab News, of course, has this photo on it. The Islamic State founder and leader who blew himself up with a suicide vest as US Special Forces raided his hideout in northwest Syria. Arab News talks about the implications. The Guardian leads with Brexit and the news the EU is preparing to sign off on an extension to the end of January with an option for the UK to leave earlier if the withdrawal agreement's ratified in Parliament. That's according to a leaked draft of the agreement seen by The Guardian, it says. The LA Times, of course, is focusing on those wildfires that are raging throughout Northern California. The paper's talking about the massive Kincade fire. It's being fueled by powerful winds as it continues its southwest march across Sonoma County. Many winery properties have been destroyed, with more than 2 million people across the region having been thrown into darkness because of electricity blackouts. Independent, the business pages looks at customers in the UK who are being left cashless and cut off by unacceptable IT failures caused by financial companies. This is the Treasury Committee report that's come out looking at prolonged IT failures. It says they should not be tolerated. The current level and frequency of them is unacceptable to consumers. It harms them, it says. And then finally, Deutsche Welle website has the masterpiece of the Italian painter. We've already looked at this, Cimabue. It was sold for €24 million at an art auction in Paris. The painting, known as Christ Mocked, was discovered after hanging for decades over a cooker in the kitchen of the home of an unsuspecting elderly lady in northern France. So Stephanie is back, as promised, to look through some of these stories. And I was reading this article that dominates the front page of Arab News, Understandable Why, and it talks a lot about what happened in terms of, you know, chasing down the leader of IS. But it reminds us all of IS when it was at its height of power and what that looked like. It was kind of chilling reading, really.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is one of the most terrifying terror groups that we've encountered with the attacks that we saw across Europe, particularly in France. We saw beheadings of different nationalities. And I think what's quite shocking or striking about this is that this is coming at a time when the United States is withdrawing from Syria, and yet they've had this coup.
They've had this coup, and President Trump was very vocal, of course, at a press conference to explain what happened, how they did it, but also the collaboration with all the different parties involved, you know, with Syria, with Turkey, with Russia, with the Kurds as well.
Exactly.
Everybody seemingly getting on board to work together to reach this end goal. Yes,
and that leads to the next question, of course, of what will happen to this group. Does it dissipate? Does it reform? Do we see a schism amongst any potential leaders who could inherit it? So what's the prospects?
And Arab News kind of tries to dig into that a little bit, doesn't it, in this article? And it talks about as well the fact that hours after the raid that led to the killing of the leader, it talks about how his right-hand man, second in command, Abu al-Hassan al-Muhajir, it's reported that he was also killed by US forces and Kurdish forces.
Yes, there's obviously been some incredible intelligence breakthrough that would have led to this. And again, this question of collaboration between the various powers makes us wonder what's going to happen next in terms of when the United States pulls out. How is this whole reconfiguration? This is a sort of long fraught region in history, and particularly now.
And how does this play out for President Trump in the United States as he obviously prepares for an election next year? Is this, as you say, a powerful coup for him to win votes, do we think, next year, in a similar way to President Obama when he was, you know, we saw the videos or we saw the images of him and Hillary Clinton at the time in the White House watching live how they tracked down Osama bin Laden, the then leader of Al-Qaeda?
I'm not sure if it's going to have the same resonance simply because Osama bin Laden was directly responsible for the 9/11 attacks. So I think most Americans were able to equate his capture and eventual killing with what they perceive to be justice for that attack. I think in this case it's a degree removed. I'm not sure that the average American is going to know who this person is or the significance of it, but nonetheless it will signal that US President Donald Trump was very strong and worked together and
And also, really, as you say, a diplomatic coup for him at a time when there was, international bewilderment at his decision, and also within Congress, huge criticism on all sides about his decision to pull US troops out.
Yeah, the timing of this is very unusual, I think, given all of that. And it leads to these questions of what could that mean for US policy in the region?
We shall watch this space, but in the meantime, many would argue it's, well, I was going to say good news. You can't call it good news, but a massive shift in what's happening in that part of the world. Let's have a look then, excuse me, at The Guardian, which is looking at Brexit, as most of the UK press is, and the expectation that the EU will grant an extension today.
Yes, there had been rumblings that the French President Emmanuel Macron was going to sort of stop this or demand a really short negotiation period of maybe a couple of weeks. But it looks as though calmer heads have prevailed, and we might get all the way up to the 31st of January if necessary. Although if the United Kingdom were to approve a deal earlier than that, we could then leave on the first day of the month that follows any agreement. And
it's got various elements within this Guardian article about, this and that, etc. But also I've been reading elsewhere on BBC Online that there's a possibility that the EU will ask, that comes with the extension agreement, that the withdrawal agreement isn't changed. That's part of the deal of getting an extension. We can't change the deal again.
Yeah, I think the EU's sort of nightmare scenario would be that somebody else comes into power in the United Kingdom and attempts to reopen the entire withdrawal agreements and renegotiate a new Brexit. And what the EU is signaling is, this is the best that we can offer. We can be flexible on time, but the actual agreement itself is not up for discussion.
Let's look then at Los Angeles Times. Kincaid Fire has wine country under siege. Governor declares an emergency. We've also been quoting the governor as saying this is unprecedented. Many viewers around the world might be saying, hang on a second, is this unprecedented? We saw this last year, didn't we?
So California is one of those parts of the United States that regularly has these wildfires. But I think what's different here is the scale. And we've also seen this really interesting power play between the government, the governor, and the California Public Utilities Commission, which has been warning that it might have been caused by an electrical transmission wire. They've had to shut down electricity.
The fires themselves.
Yeah, and therefore you have entire areas that could be without power until Wednesday, and that would have started from Saturday. So it's quite a long time. And California is sort of heralded as this sort of leader of American innovation.
State.
Yeah, so to have entire areas of the country without power for this long while they deal with this either natural disaster or at least conditions that are quite vulnerable is not great.
And this is all completely separate, isn't it, to climate change and extreme weather conditions. They're not connected, are they?
Well, I don't know if that's necessarily true. I take your point, but I think there's also the fact that this is just
I was asking the question, I don't know.
Yeah, it's such a dry region now, and that we're seeing the extremes. I think it's also, I think the fires have always happened, but now it's the scale at which they're happening, like literally the size of land affected and how long it takes to put them out.
And how hard it is, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, our next story is a story we've talked about already to a degree in the programme. Consumers left cashless by unacceptable IT failures. This is the UK Treasury Committee looking into things that have happened at TSB, but also other banks as well. And it just goes to show, some viewers have been in touch. We've been asking for viewers' views on this, and they've been saying, cash is king. It's actually quite worrying how dependent we are on our smartphones and devices just for day-to-day transactions.
Yes, and if any of these systems go down and you have people who are living perhaps in rural areas who perhaps have caring responsibilities or who are elderly and not able to get out if their online banking goes down. We've seen ATM machines, cash machines are disappearing across the United Kingdom, and we're basically being moved stealthily towards a more digital world, but that digital world has its own vulnerabilities.
Absolutely, and there's security issues as well. There's all sorts of issues, and many people are just saying, gosh, good old-fashioned pounds and pence in the wallet. Stephanie, thank you so much for being with us this morning, and thank you too for your company and your comments. #BBC The Briefing is the place to have a look and get involved, and I'll see you very soon. Bye-bye.